Hey, everybody, I'm Kat Margulis, and I'm the host of The Power of Story. And as a longtime journalist, author, and book coach, I tend to see story everywhere I go. And in recent years, I've had the opportunity to see how stories can transform lives and businesses. And so that's what I want to explore with you and my guests through this series, is so that you can create the life, the business, and the legacy of your dreams using story. So today, I'm really happy to have with me Kendall Haven. Kendall is a master storyteller who has performed for over 6.8 million worldwide during his 32-year career, and who has led the research effort for the National Storytelling Association into the architecture of effective stories and into the process of story-based influence and persuasion. He's an internationally recognized expert on the neuroscience of story and created the first detailed tested model of story that accounts for the neurology of how narrative material is processed, understood, remembered, and recalled. He has published 34 books of and on the science and use of stories and of on storytelling, and has won 20 major awards for his writing and performance storytelling. Gosh, Kendall.
Goodness gracious.
Am I ever excited to chat with you today about storytelling? Thank you for being here.
It is a pleasure to be here. I'm excited.
Thank you. Thank you. So, your biography and your knowledge and your experience in storytelling are extensive. I'm wondering, have you been surprised, or when have you been surprised, or what have you found surprising with regards to the power of story in all the research you've done?
In a very simple word, it is that human beings really are homo narratus. We're story animals. And it's not just the way we live, it is the biology of a human being. That is to say, the biology of the human brain. The way our brains are wired, the way our brains are developed is all about using story. The brain is hardwired really to make sense out of all incoming information in story terms. All experiences are interpreted in story terms. Story is this filter that lies between you and the outside world, and nothing gets into your brain without being converted into story form. Nothing gets remembered other than in story form. It is the way the human brain is hardwired to operate.
So fascinating. So fascinating. And I wonder, what haven't we, to me, this still all of this still feels really fresh. And I'm a writer by trade, and did the English school, you know what I mean? Like we did, learned about, I guess, what aren't we learning in school, in colleges and universities, that you feel is like really integral about story and storytelling?
Colleges and universities are a little bit better than grade schools. Grade schools in this country are dismal, and for the last 20 years have been getting steadily worse. That is to say, take an art form, let's say painting. And you can learn to paint. First, you learn the craft, how to hold a brush, how to do strokes, how to combine colors, how to make shapes. And then you sort of learn your own expression of that. That's the art. And you can learn to paint and ignore the science that's behind it. But if you learn the science behind it, you're talking wavelengths and the way that certain wavelengths juxtapose with other wavelengths of color, and the way that the brain interprets dark, light, shadow. Once you learn that, then you can suddenly say, oh, that's why it works when I do this. Oh, and then you get to extend what you know about what you've learned about the craft of painting, knowing exactly how it will affect the brains and the minds and the emotions of the people who view your painting. Same is true with writing. We have ignored, in this country certainly, but generally speaking around the world, it's also true, we've ignored the fact that there is an incredible body of science research behind how and why narratives, and particularly those that we put in story form, affect human beings, affect our emotions, affect our memory, uh, uh, can influence us, that is, change attitudes, beliefs, values, and or understanding in order to change behavior. But that science is there, and it really forms the bedrock of how human beings communicate. It
Yeah.
explains why communication works and why it doesn't work when it doesn't.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Um, you talk about story is the currency of influence, and you kind of touched on there. So let's go there.
Okay.
What does that
Uh,
mean?
well, anytime you communicate with another human being, really what you're trying to do is, even if it's purely, you think you're doing something purely for entertainment, you're touching on some belief, attitude, value, some knowledge base of that person, and giving them something new to add into that knowledge base or that belief system, and therefore alter it a little bit. That's influence. Influence is the act of changing attitudes, beliefs, values, and or understanding in order to change behavior or outcome, the way we then act as human beings. And story, as it turns out, is particularly structured to be effective at exerting influence
Mm.
because of the relationship between what gets into the conscious mind and then what gets into memory, and how we pull information back out of memory when we recall it, and the form and structure of that information when we pull it back out, so that you hear a story and a month later suddenly a situation comes up and that story pops back into your head, and what do you know, it causes you to do something a little different than you might have otherwise done. That's influence.
Mm-hmm.
And story, because of the way that the human brain is wired to process initially information and then to file it into memory and then to recall it back out of memory, story winds up being an amazingly powerful tool for doing that. That is to say, exerting influence.
Um, I want to geek out on the science for a little bit,
Yeah.
because we had a pre-chat earlier, and I just really loved hearing. I want to hear about the biology. What is happening inside of our bodies?
Okay. So let's say you read something. That's an easy one to do. Information goes down the optic nerve into the lower back part of the brain, the subconscious or unconscious part of the brain, where there's a whole lot of initial processing. Now, as far as you know, when you read something, what goes through your eye and into your brain are letters and words, right? Wrong.
Yes.
That's not what goes down the optic nerve. What goes down the optic nerve is more like a dot pattern. It's more like, you remember the old TVs that had that big, big bulky TVs that had that cathode ray gun that actually fired information at each individual pixel, one pixel at a time on the screen? It's that kind of a dot pattern that says, black, white, gray, or or when TVs got a little bit newer, then did the same thing for the color, the 3 color layers in each of those little pixels. That kind of information is what goes down the optic nerve, and in these centers back there, that gets reformed into something that the brain says, oh, that's a line, that it sends over to recognition centers that say, well, yeah, I recognize that line. That's called a letter, or a number or a symbol. That then goes back and gets clumped in with the other symbols around it, and then it goes back into recognition that says that actually is, we call that a word, and runs it over to the dictionary and says, oh, I know that word. All right, you're not consciously aware of any of that processing. At the same time that processing is going on, and we can see the little centers, the little micro centers in the brain that do that processing. At the same time they're going on, we can see these little micro centers light up that are the centers that control the elements of story. So what you're doing is interpreting that information as it gets put together in story elements, character, what are they doing, an action, a goal, what are they trying to do, why are they doing that, motive, why are they doing that, What does this mean to me? So you're looking for relevance, context, all of those story elements. We can see those centers light up, and by controlling the input that someone gets when they're all wired up in a test chamber, we can isolate those different little micro centers and what they do. And we can see which elements control how the brain then processes and makes sense out of this incoming information. We can watch the brain shove it into story form. The cool part is that all happens before the information ever gets to your conscious mind, ever. What first reaches the conscious mind is not what reaches your sensory organs. It is your self-created story-based version of that original source material, distorted altered from that original in order to make it make sense to you.
Wow.
Okay, so knowing that, the practical use of story science and neural story science is to say, well, if we know how the brain of our target audience is going to make sense out of this, then I can take those same bits of story-based information and make sure that I feed them to my audience so that they will interpret my information the way I want them to. I know they're going to interpret it. The question is not, are they going to interpret it at all? It's, are they going to interpret the way I want them to, or in some other wild and bizarre way, which happens all the time.
Yes. That is so. First of all, what's blowing my mind is, like you said, that all of this sifting and organization and processing is happening not in our conscious mind.
No.
And then you've got this middleman, the ultimate middleman or woman, that is taking that raw material and making it mean something before we're even aware of it.
Right. It's a two-step process. First, we try to make it make sense so we can just understand it. That actually is how magic works. Your brain forces the information that's coming into your eye to make sense to you. And when you do that, and this is why every effective story, every effective communication is target audience specific. When you see something like, let's say, a magic trick, and someone has a deck of cards, they go, "Whoop, whoop, 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 whoop," and you go, "Whoa, yeah, how did you do that?" Well, it's because your brain is forcing the visual information that came in to make sense to you. So how do you do it? You take all of your banks of prior knowledge, your experiences, what you believe, what you know that's correct, what you know that's wrong, whatever it is that's all of your past, your experiences, and your brain literally runs into those and says, what's the most likely of all the information that I have stored in my brain, what's the most likely explanation to make this make sense, what I just saw, what I just experienced, and runs that back, and that's what gets sent to your conscious mind is what happened. And so magicians can manipulate that to make you see something and then make sense out of it in the way they want you to. Whereas if you knew what they're doing, you can make sense out of it in a totally different way that suddenly takes all the magic and the fun out of it.
Yeah.
But it's that process of the brain. Well, the thing is, neither the receiver nor the communicator knows that that's happening. It happens at a subconscious level.
Yeah.
So the target audience, when you're speaking, let's go back to more practical communication. When you're speaking, or even when you write and give something to someone, you think you're being incredibly clear. Why? Because it makes total sense to you. It already did make sense to you before you started talking, right? Or before you started writing. So you say, this makes total sense. This is exactly what I want to say. They read it and have to make sense out of it and say, in whatever way it makes sense to them, they'll say, that's exactly what this person tried to say, what they meant. Even though what the target audience perceives as what the speaker or the writer actually meant and what the writer actually meant can be totally different. They both think they are correct. And so you have this great miscommunication. Happens all the time.
Yeah.
The most valuable thing you can do as a communicator is to start approaching everything you write or say from the viewpoint of your target audience. be your target audience. Look at your material through the eyes of your audience and build it that way so that it will make sense to them the way that you want it to. We too often go in and say, okay, did I say exactly what I wanted to say? Did I write exactly what I wanted to write? Meaningless question. The question is, did I write or say what I had to say in order to make my target audience understand it the way I need for them to understand it? And that is a totally different question, which requires a very different approach to communication.
That is blowing my mind. First of all, it's incredibly disconcerting and disturbing to know that as a writer, as an author, whatever I think I'm putting out there in trying to influence the reader, that is not necessarily what they're receiving. But also, like you answered the next question was like, how do I get around that?
Yep.
And it's really cool because I am hearing through the series, I am hearing like we really do get to put ourselves in the place of the audience, the customer,
Yep.
the reader. But even more than that, what I'm hearing in what you're saying is like really getting into that filter space. Like,
Exactly. So what you're trying to do is say, okay, who do I want to communicate to? And more specifically, anytime you want to communicate, you want to have an effect. You want to do something. Now let's call an effect something that's physically measurable. That's to say, it'll be better if I don't drop the earpiece. Let's say an effect is something physical, a shift in behavior. You want them to do something, talk differently. It has to be something physical and measurable. That's what you're really trying to accomplish. To do that, what you need to do are change attitudes, beliefs, values, understanding, right? Something internal. To communicate effectively, you have to be able to identify what is it inside my target audience that I need to address and change. Is it an issue they have, a want that they have? What do I need to address? And the way to get at it is to say, why aren't they doing what I want them to do already? Why aren't they? Why aren't they doing? What is it? And what do they get out of their current behavior, their current thinking? So these are all things that then have to be addressed in the way I put my communication together so that it is relevant to them and addresses the issues that are controlling their thinking and therefore their behavior.
Oh my God, I love that hack. I gotta rewind this and take notes later. Why aren't they already doing it?
Why aren't they already? Yeah, why aren't they already doing what I want them to do?
Yes.
There's going to be a reason. And then what value do they get from their current behavior, their current thinking? And there will be some. And if you can understand those, then you can start to piece together, what is it that I have to change? How do I want to reframe their thinking so that they see the value that I see from my thinking, from my behavior that I want them to have? So it's it's changing their perception of cost and benefit almost, moment by moment and issue by issue.
Very powerful. That's amazing. Thank you for that. That's incredible. And I mean, this is probably everything, but I'm still, I'm thinking about, writers, and I guess we're all magicians, authors and sales and entrepreneurs.
Sure.
We're all magicians. We're all, casting a spell or influencing or wanting them to see something through the way we want them to see it.
You're creating a different reality.
Yeah.
It doesn't get more magical than that.
Yeah. And I wonder, like, I love your hack for how to get inside the mind of our target audience. But I'm curious, just like, again, back to the biology and the neurology of the story components and all those things that we're lighting up. What are the key things that we should tune into when it comes to the structure of the components?
Okay. A couple. First, there are several, call them character positions, that seem to be hardwired into the models that the brain automatically uses to make sense out of information. One is, who's this about? The main character, all right?
Mm.
Who's this really about? The second character position is, so what is the physical embodiment of the greatest obstacle that's keeping them from getting what they're after?
Mm.
Okay. Third character position is, this is where this is where different audiences start to really shift in the way they make sense out of and create meaning from the same material. Third character position is, who do I identify with most in this story?
Mm.
I have been to a movie. I went to a movie once with and she's, oh gosh, she was then in her 80s, older woman that we would take up to the movies. You know, it's one of those things we do. And she was a cool person, but we'd pick her up and take her to the movies when we were going to the movies. And we watched this movie, and we finished it, and we talk about it a little bit. And there was a side character. I mean, one of those little characters that's there a number of times, but is sort of just in the more in for context in the environment, right? Than really. And that was the only character she cared about. And I said, what? Wait a minute, that she doesn't figure into the plot. She doesn't figure into the way the story resolves anything. She said, no, but I loved her dress. I used to have a dress just like that. All right. What she got from that movie was not at all what the producer, the writer, the director, any of the actors intended. It was just a movie, so who cared? But if that had been an important piece of communication that we had been watching, she wouldn't have gotten anything that was intended to be communicated to her. So it's this identity character. And then the last one is one that we sort of experimentally stumbled on. Let's call it the climax character. And I'll define it as that character or that entity, because it can be a program, it can be a document, it doesn't have to be a live sentient character, but that holds the power at the climax of the story to make it come out the way that character wants it to. Often this gets called the hero position, but hero implies that it's always going to come out to the good. And it doesn't have to. And it often doesn't. So that could be a side character who steps up at the climax, and it could be the antagonist. But the question is, who has the power? And the way we found out about it is in quizzing audiences who would hear, we'd wire them up, we give them a story, and then we interview them afterwards. And one of the questions that when they kept identifying this position, what turned out to be this position, was they were looking for who to blame when it didn't come out right.
Wow.
And that wasn't necessarily the antagonist.
Wow.
To their minds, it was always the person who should have stepped up and made it come out right.
Wow.
So that's something that automatically the human brain seeks out, who has the power and therefore the responsibility to end this story the way I want it to be ended. Okay, so we had those 4 character positions. Add into those then goal and motive. And you can have it for each of those characters. Goal is something physical and tangible. Peace on earth is a lousy goal because no one knows what it looks like. Happiness, terrible goal. No one knows what it looks like. What you want is for your audience to be able to see at every given moment, is the main character getting closer to their goal or not? Which requires that the goal be something tangible, something visualizable, right? Motive then is when we get into those internal, the values, the norms, the beliefs, the attitudes, the problems, the gripes, the prejudices, that all comes as motive, and got us to discover one other thing called motive matching. And we found that in almost any story, all I had to do was shift a sentence or two, and I'd say a 10-minute story, where I would change a character's primary motive, and I could control how an audience would respond to any of the characters in the story just by making one simple little switch in a single sentence that flipped motive. And we found that motive, the human brain automatically seeks out the motive question. Why are they doing that? Why are they doing that? Why is that? And we value motive far more than goal. You can kill someone if you do it for the right reason, and we're okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you even push someone for the wrong reason, it's abhorrent, and we're all over you, right? So it's not the physical act, it's not the goal, it's the motive behind it that we've found is the key to controlling this identity character.
Wow.
At the same time, we also find most businesses and organizations are reticent, if not loathing, to include motive. They'll talk about what they're going to do, but they won't talk about the real heart and soul, the whys behind it. What are their motives? Why do they want to do what they want to do? They want to put out programs to talk about how great the program is. What they really need to talk about is why they want to put out the program.
Oh my God. I'm just trying to control my brain from going to my books and the edit tweaks I get to make right now.
So,
but I love that you're going into the business. And so, yeah, I'm curious from a business perspective, how can, well, they get to go into motive? Like, where do they get to go so that they can take advantage of these components or work with these
see,
components?
it's not, it's that their target audience will automatically require motive. If I'm a manager, I'm a CEO, and I want to get up and say something to the frontline workers, all the frontline, in my 15 different factories around the country, around the world, and I say something, every one of those workers is going to be, why is he saying that? What's it behind it? Why is he doing that? Why is he doing it now? What's going on? And they will, if I, the speaker, don't give them that motive, tell them exactly why I'm doing it in a way that sounds believable, they will all infer it. And here's what we found in the lab. When audiences, and I didn't see any cultural differences in this, although we haven't done this with cultures from all around the world, but so far haven't detected any cultural differences. Audiences always infer a more negative motive than the speaker thought, than the speaker intended.
Yeah.
So audiences tend to ascribe self-serving motives to people, even sarcastic and cruel motives to people. And so what that lets them do is then flip the whole story so that the speaker becomes the antagonist, the bad guy.
Oh my God.
And that happens internally with internal communications in companies all the time. Half the time I'm brought into companies, it's because the CEO or one of the C-suite people tried to put out a program and it backfired and blew up in their faces, and everyone hated it, and they're at a total loss for understanding why, because they thought it was going to be a really popular big program, and it's just the way they put out the story.
Wow. Wow. I'm gonna pause the timer so it doesn't go off. I could talk about this all day with you. We definitely get to do this again. Before I let you go, is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yes, I want to. It's this. Every aspect of what we call story, every nuance of it, is understandable and manageable by every person who ever needs to communicate. You can consciously design your stories to communicate exactly what you want them to communicate. Most of the time we just think, well, I got to just tell the story, and you try to put it out as if it were a fixed thing that and not yours to manipulate. And no, stories are incredibly malleable. They are responsive, obedient servants. They will do exactly what you want them to do. They're incredibly flexible and amazingly powerful. And understanding the science of story is the key to understanding how to manipulate and control every element and aspect of story so that they will do what you want them to do.
Yeah. Incredible. Incredible. And man, that would really diffuse a lot of situations too. Peacekeeper story as peacekeeper.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. It certainly will do it.
Yeah.
And it so often doesn't, just because people don't look at their story from the viewpoint of the other, the person with whom they're trying to create peace. And so they want to present their side of the story.
Mhm.
Well, it's opposed to putting their side of the story within terms of and context of the other person's side of the story.
In context of the other person's story.
And it would make it so much more effective.
Yeah. Powerful, Kendall. Powerful. Thank you so much for this incredible conversation. Oh my gosh, I gotta watch this over again and again. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you so much for sharing some of your knowledge with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Stories are, we are story animals. We are homo narratus. And the more we understand story and how it works within our own brains, the more it becomes our obedient servant and does exactly what we want it to do.
Incredible. Thank you so much. Thank you all for watching this. And just know there is going to be a Power Story workshop on October 24th and more amazing interviews coming up. So stay tuned. Thank you, Kendall. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everybody. See you soon.